Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of our Smart Grid series. And we'll be discussing today building resilience, mitigating the impact of the aging workforce, and resource constraints. So, my name is Christina Park. I'm really excited to be your host today. I am the Senior Director of Energy Marketing here at Skydio. I've been here since March of this year. And prior to that, I spent the last 15 years at the New York Power Authority. So, my last role there was as Senior Director of a department called Asset Intelligence Solutions. So, I kind of got there in a little bit of a roundabout way, but I started as an engineer in the hydro engineering department working on extension and modernization programs for our hydro plants, and then moved over to strategic operations in the last few years, working with asset management, building up our reliability centered maintenance program, investigating technology solutions and technical enablement, and monitoring diagnostics to really try to end bring digital solutions to scale. So I'm really excited to put these two roles together and actually quite passionate about the promising future that technologies such as drones has. So let's dive in. So what are subject matter experts and why are they important in a utility? So you'll often see the acronym SME, which stands for subject matter experts. So they are highly specialized individuals who are experts in a specific, often narrow field. So they're developed over time. And whether it's generation, transmission, or distribution, it takes years of experience in design, manufacturing, and time out in the field to really develop the expertise that's needed. Historically, the SMEs at utilities are composed of personnel who've worked there for pretty much their whole careers. And while expertise is not always correlated to age, it's fairly common that your most tenured staff with the most field experience are the ones that are directing or being consulted for critical decisions in design, operations, and maintenance. So, what you want in a subject matter expert is not only someone who's technically excellent, but also someone whose experience encompasses a history in the field at your preferably at your specific utility. So their experience encompasses not only the equipment but the operating conditions and the maintenance philosophies, which can vary from utility to utility, right? And on top of that, they also are privy to the internal processes of the organization, such as procurement and how different silos work together, and the history of utility and how you've run things. So, what is the risk of losing subject matter expertise, and why is that more critical these days? So, the risk has always been there, but there's a bit of a change that comes now in this time, particularly after the pandemic. So, I'm going to take a pause here and tell a little story. Hopefully, the analogy will make sense. So, when I was in college, I played softball my freshman year, and I remember walking on the team, doing spring training, and then going to Florida for a tournament where we played double headers every day and we promptly got destroyed. So after the first 2 days of double headers, when we were run ruled in all 4 games, it was totally demoralizing for the team. And the obvious root cause was that all of our pitchers had actually graduated the previous year, which left us to start from scratch and teach 2 freshmen how to pitch that season. I was not one of them. But as you can imagine, that left us extremely vulnerable. So college sports generally follow the same formula where talent is recruited and trained and seasoned year over year. And your seniors are typically your best players and they get the most field time. So there's even this concept of redshirting. So an especially talented recruit can practice with the team for a year and then have a fifth year senior year. So they're an even stronger player. So that being said, I think utilities are kind of at a point these days where it's like playing on a team where the majority of the starting lineup are seniors on the brink of graduation, and the landscape of normal has changed where incoming students aren't necessarily inclined to stay with the same team or even with the same sport for 4 or 5 years. So, as a coach, how do you not get run ruled in every game? So, I think there are 2 factors to be considered these days in utility leadership when it comes to staffing and succession planning. The first is with the pandemic, as is common with a lot of other industries across the board, there was a sudden increase in the number of people changing careers. So, for utilities in particular, there was also an increase in the number of retirements for those who were eligible. So these 2 factors together meant that many of the staff with the most knowledge were suddenly out the door, some with little to no warning. So the second factor is that there's been a bit of a culture change in approaching careers in the last couple generations. So while it was fairly commonplace in the past to stay in one industry or one company for the majority of a career, that's actually no longer the norm. So when you look at college graduates today, particularly with how they've grown up with information at their fingertips, the long-term career mindset has shifted, and it's much more commonplace to move around every few years. So when you think about subject matter expertise, it has a dependency on people sticking with a field or company for a long time, as well as the ability to retain and develop successors. So I'm sure we've all experienced this whenever anyone leaves a company, where you try to make sure you retain their knowledge and their files in their last few weeks. But we've all had the situation where we wish we'd done more before they left, because once they're gone, we're looking for a piece of information, or we're looking for a decision that they would have made really easily, that we may be left up in the air for. So what are some ways that the risk can be mitigated? So to go back to my softball team analogy, there were actually two effects of losing the entire bullpen to graduation. The obvious one is that we had no strength on the mound, and the opposing team is going to crush us and rack up the runs. The less obvious one is that all of us on the team were actually awful at batting, because we were getting pitched to in practice by inexperienced pitchers. So I myself couldn't get my bat off the shoulder fast enough, because the opposing pitchers were throwing 5 times as fast as what I was seeing in practice. So, to our coach's everlasting credit, what did they do? After the first 2 days of getting demoralized, they took us to the batting cages. It was probably the most effective use of our practice time. And in a couple hours, we were all simultaneously able to go up against machines who would throw us pitches that were fast and accurate enough in the strike zone to prepare us for the real thing. It wasn't going to be efficient, nor was it going to be effective to keep practicing the way we always had with who we had for the rest of the season. And it was time to bring in some machines and help solve the problem as quickly as possible. It was very obvious that we couldn't solve the pitching problem that tournament week, but we could solve the batting problem and give our pitchers a chance to develop. So, in consideration of the fact that the workforce may be nearing retirement, it's important to increase efficiencies in succession planning and execution. And sometimes it's important to look outside the box and think about technologies that we can bring in, much like the batting cages gave us machines that helped us accelerate the way that we mitigated that risk. So while there's no substitute for the tribal knowledge that's passed down from mentor to apprentice, there are ways to make that process more effective. So with a robust digital record of the assets and equipment, training can be richer with real life visuals and media instead of conceptual and anecdotal knowledge shares. And with the increase in quality data, the burden and the risk of placing responsibilities on your engineers decreases, as they will no longer be dependent on needing decades of experience to confidently make technical decisions. So a subject matter expert with 30 or more years under his or her belt knows from experience how stress corrosion cracking will propagate, knows from experience how to identify a hotspot and just how bad that really is. They can use their intuition to make decisions without needing as much input. But if you take a more junior or mid-level engineer, that's a really daunting task. And those are really big shoes to fill. And the consequences of making a wrong decision are actually quite high. So having quality data to both train and analyze for justification fills some of the gaps for developing staff, so they can develop that intuition more quickly and also keep better records and justify their decisions. So it seems every year I get more work to do, but there aren't enough people to do it. I think everybody in the utility can resonate with that. I think with some of the energy goals and the clean energy goals that exist, there are more EV charging stations that need to be built. So loads are going to increase. Many utilities are expanding their transmission landscape. And with that, it doesn't necessarily always come with additional headcount. So how do we create workforce efficiencies? So budgeting personnel resources can be really tricky, but even if you plan perfectly for the next year, there will be this unexpected surprise of emergent work from a failure, or there will be a new project or an expansion that wasn't necessarily expected, or there will be somebody leaving your team that was also unexpected. So these factors, while they are not planned, you can almost count on some surprise curveball coming around the bend. So these can be mitigated in a couple of different ways. Ultimately, your staff were not hired for their ability to drive to some remote location. They were hired for their ability to design or assess or operate or maintain a piece of equipment. So by injecting technology such as drones to do the task of capturing your data, your staff's time can be maximized to focus on their area of expertise, and really cut the fat of their time logistically getting to the area that needs to be examined. Number two, with the ability to inspect more often or more thoroughly, early indicators can help you detect the small problems before they become big problems. So this will reduce the amount of forced outages and emergent work that comes up. So while it's impossible to predict everything, we can certainly get a more accurate landscape of what the current asset health is of all of our equipment. So then the question is, well, okay, drones sound like a viable solution, but this is something that most people have not actually had experience in, particularly in a utility where a good portion of your staff may or may not be familiar with robotics or new technologies. So, how do I convince people to try something new? So, change can be a really difficult concept to embrace, particularly in an essential industry that has very little margin for failure. So it can be very daunting to have to go get a Part 107 pilot's license or to fly a robot near an energized environment. And in some audiences, there may be resistance against the thought that a robot will come and take their jobs away. So when I think about drone solutions, I think of it as a tool and a skill that's used to do a job more safely and more efficiently. So this is almost like if you want to be a qualified electrical worker, you have to go get certain certifications. You have to maintain a certain license, right? If you want to be a welder, you have to have a welding certification. If you want to drive a forklift, you have to have a certain type of driver's license. So, in the same way, flying a drone is something that you get certified in. You take a test, a written exam, much like a written exam for a driver's license, to make sure that you understand the basics of the rules, and then you get some flight time in. This is a skill that can be used just like any other tool that's currently used today. Having the drone doesn't actually change people's jobs or their job descriptions and purpose, it helps them do their jobs. So here, we're going to show a video of someone using our drone for the first time. You can hear the nervousness and uncertainty as they fly near energized lines, but you can also see their surprise as they see how it's much easier than they thought it would be.
Is it making you nervous? Remember how I told you that I was kind of scared of it the other day? It is a terrifying thing to surrender the control in something like this. Good thing is if I'm videoing it and it wrecks, I got it on video. Right? I think it does too. I think it's doing fine.
So you can see here, this is somebody's first experience using the drone. And I can say for myself from firsthand experience, one of the cool things when I came over to Skydio is part of the onboarding is they give you a drone and we go up on the rooftop and we learn how to fly it. And never having really flown one before, it was a little bit scary to think I'm going to launch this thing off of a roof and hope that it doesn't crash. But it was actually within an hour, I was able to control it, even from my iPhone controller, not even one of our enterprise controllers. And test out the obstacle avoidance and understand that it's okay to take some risks with our drones because I can fly it at the side of a wall and it's going to go around it. So I think lowering the barrier of entry for your staff is something that's very valuable and hopefully will go a long way in your change management. So if we move on, what does this mean for my inspection strategy, right? So information is power. I think maybe I'm dating myself. In the 90s, we used to say knowledge is power. But as we said, knowledge can't just be passed down from person to person anymore. We can actually embody that in information and disseminate it more easily. So the efficiency gains of implementing drone solutions can alleviate the stress of not being able to keep up with the growing amount of tasks. And the data obtained can help you actually prioritize your tasks. So based on what you see, you now have the justification and the ability to say, well, this asset, I don't know, this dam needs to be looked at ahead of this transformer because the data that I'm seeing is I see a crack that may propagate and we don't want to end up having regulatory violations when the time comes around. So we're going to go take a closer look and invest our resources over there. So you can make a more accurate understanding of the state of your infrastructure, both holistically and relatively, which will give you clarity on how to allocate the resources, often limited resources that you have, and overall increase productivity. So why are other utilities considering this? So it's becoming clearer as time goes on that the way we've always done things, that's just not sustainable going forward. So many utilities are considering drone solutions, often as an R&D or exploration effort. But I think what's exciting is actually seeing how many utilities are further along in their journey and starting to think bigger and looking to operationalize these drones into their workflow. So in this next video, you can hear a testimonial from Levi Young of the Arkansas Valley Electric Cooperative and his view of the value that they've found in the field.
Whenever we were wanting to map a substation, we took thousands of pictures, and there was a few of us pilots, and then there was a few linemen, a sub-tech engineer as well, and it took about a day. Now I can go by myself and fly an entire substation without anybody there, and I don't have to touch the controller after I say go.
It's making your company more effective and more efficient, and that's the future of where we're going.
I'm happy to be using Skydio and happy to be able to do this.
There is one thing that I forgot to mention up front. For those of you who are at episode 1, we will be having a Q&A session shortly. And if you have any questions regarding what we've talked about today or about our products, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A time. So as shown in this previous video by Levi and the AVAX staff, if you think about the time savings, apples to apples, between manual inspections and drone inspections, you can see that your staff efficiency gains will prove the value in a very obvious way. So we can see it in the hours, man hours that are saved. You can see that he said that what previously took a staff days to come out and do, he could come out by himself and execute all of those missions or all of those inspections all at once. On top of that, you get the added value of having a fully digitized record that you can upload to the cloud, push to your platforms that you use within your utility, your systems of record, and you can capture that that information and disseminate it easily to all of your staff. Yeah, so I think at this point, we will actually go into our Q&A. I'd like to introduce my colleague, John Fernandez, who will be answering questions with me.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Fernandez. I'm a senior solutions engineer with Skydio. Been here about 3 years, and I've been in the drone industry for about 7 or 8. I have a law enforcement and IT background, and most recently I've been working a lot with some of our larger utility customers. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, John. So once again, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and I will go look at some of these now. So I think one of the questions that comes up very frequently, actually, is, can you give an example of when a retirement caused a gap in your organization? So I actually have a couple, but I think one that really stands out to me is we had a gentleman who worked in one of our hydro plants. He was there for a good 30 years, a little bit older. And he was a senior electrical engineer, I believe. But don't let his title fool you, because he knew the plant inside out. He had been there so long. He had been through life extension and modernization programs, and he was the one who knew exactly the operating context and how they were maintained. And so we knew that we could always count on Rick, and it was almost that we counted on Rick too much. So there was one day that, I woke up, I got an email, and I found out that he passed away. He had had a heart attack very suddenly, and it was very unfortunate that he was gone. And I think that once we kind of went past the funeral and mourning and all of that, we realized that the effects that Rick had had on our organization were far greater than his title or what he, made public was available. So when we went to actually take apart some of these hydro units and look into the turbines and really try to investigate so that we could write the spec to figure out how to overhaul them, we realized that the drawings didn't really match what we were finding when we opened it up. We found that there were gaskets where we didn't know there were gaskets, or there were gaskets missing, or there were O-rings. The grooves were not quite the same. That there were a lot of little patches and fixes that Rick had done to keep the plant running. And he did them very quietly because he knew the machine so well that when he saw something, he just fixed it. Didn't really tell anyone, didn't make a big deal because everybody was so busy with all the other fires they had to put out. So this is one example of you have somebody who you don't necessarily think is so critical to your industry, but once they're gone, there's all this knowledge that you can't get back. And it would have been awesome if there was a way to document everything that he had done, so that we could have a more accurate picture. But this was an example where what we had was not what we thought we had, and there was no way to actually go back in time and document it or ask questions. So I think this was something that hit me. He was a very close colleague of mine, but I think it hit me pretty hard because as I was the engineer trying to write the spec and figure out the best possible turbine redesign, it would have been really helpful to know exactly what we had, what went wrong, and all the ways we had mitigated it. So I think that's the biggest example I can think of where a retirement or a death or a sudden exit of one form or another had really impacted the organization. Another question we have, do you have any testimonials for indoor use and 3D mapping software? Also, when can we expect S2 Plus to be available? So I think as far as the indoor use and 3D mapping, John, would you mind fielding this one?
Yeah, we have quite a few clients using our 3D scan for mapping. Most recently, we've introduced the indoor mapping skill. So we've got a few customers that are just starting to use that. I would defer to reviewing we have testimonials on our website. Probably best to link to that in chat. That can show some of the clients we're working with and how they're using it. We've also got quite a few 3D models on our website as well of not only stuff that we've done, but stuff that our clients have done using our 3D scan and then subsequently converted into 3D models.
Thanks, John. Another question is, what types of data do you see other utilities digitizing through drone inspection, and how does it help knowledge transfer? So I touched on this a little bit before, but with Skydio, you can take visual images and thermal images. This is just kind of the basic level of doing inspections or doing security perimeter scans. So with this, you actually get that full digital library. You can use it to do time lapse. So you can see, day over day or however often you're running your inspections to see if there is any progress. So you could see a propagation of a crack. You can see the effects of a hotspot and how that's spreading an area. You could actually see degradation, or even things like vegetation management in a transmission right of way. You can see over time what is growing, the rate at which it's growing, and then make your mitigation strategy based on that. So I think for the visual inspections and thermal inspections, that's what we see most of our customers using. And as John said, we do have 3D scans so that you can actually get a digital twin or a digital model of a piece of equipment, such as a transmission tower or any of your other assets. You could use a cooling tower or a transformer, etc. So that's most of what we see our utilities doing as far as digitization. Another question, do I need certified pilots, and what's the process for training a crew? So John, I'm actually going to kick this one back to you as well.
Yeah, sure. So unless you're operating under a COA, then yeah, you're going to need certified pilots. It's fairly easy to get your pilot certified. We also offer the option to do the online training for 107 prep through Skydio Academy. So we've got the different skills training for our different software on Skydio Academy, and then we also have that option as well. But yeah, so need to be 107 certified again, unless you're going to be flying under a COA. It's much easier just to go ahead and do the 107 training. Really, unless there's some edge case or specific use where you need to operate outside of 107 very often, that's just the best way to go instead of trying to do a COA. But it's not hard to do. There's plenty of other resources online. Sit and take the test, and then you're certified. And then the recertification process has changed a lot recently. It's much easier. You don't have to go in person. There's no cost. It's just an online recertification to keep your 107.
Great. Thanks, John. Another question that we have, do you have any examples of successful change management out in the field? So I think at my previous utility, we did have a story that I like to tell of one of our union workers who actually had an accident, not at work, but at home, where he fell off of a ladder. And so he sustained some injuries. And I think that was obviously an issue. And based on his job description, the injuries he sustained actually affected his ability to do his job. So I think he was a bit nervous about his ability to come back once he had medical treatment. And this was a story that was actually a very big success for the drones program, because he came and saw the value of learning how to use a tool to do his job in a way that doing it manually was no longer possible. So he got his license, he got trained up, he became one of our pilots, and he became, I think, a success story of seeing somebody who may not have looked at the drone the same way had his circumstances been different. But because of it, it enabled him to actually do his job exactly the way it was written, in a way that he otherwise might not have been able to do. So I think once you can actually get it into people's hands and have them try it and see, much like the videos earlier, that it's much easier than they imagine it to be, the change management, actually the dominoes fall much quicker. So that's very exciting. I think we can take one more question with the time we have left. So how can leveraging drone inspections help me reduce the amount of emergent inspections and reduce CMI? So I think when we talk about emergent work, so work that was not planned, right, or forced outages, I think those are things that every utility wants to avoid or minimize. And so with the drone inspections, what you get is you get a more accurate view of your asset health and your perimeter security in a way that you may not have been able to do before because of resource constraints or budget constraints. So for example, remote substations, it takes time for people to get out there. It takes time to manually conduct an inspection, takes time to come back. And you may or may not have the record of that inspection, may be pen and paper. It may be what the person saw. It may be possibly on an iPhone and some sort of mobile solution. But at the end of the day, by putting a drone out there, particularly in remote areas, with our dock and remote solutions, you're able to actually get data points as frequently as you'd like. You can set it off like a sprinkler and have it run every morning without actually having to go out there at all. So by having a more accurate view of your asset health, you can detect these early indicators and find those small problems before they turn into emergent work and forced outages. I think that's all the time we have for today. Really appreciate everybody joining us. I think we at Skydio see the future not just of robotics, but of intelligent robotics and autonomy. And we would love to partner with you to build your enterprise resilience. So please be on the lookout for information coming soon for episode 3, where we will discuss distribution automation. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.